Welcome to Globewatch with me, Charles Ebuni. It is reported that in the early 60s and 70s, Cameroon paid the contributions of South Korea to the United Nations. Today, the country has made dramatic progress and becoming one of the most powerful economies on the world. So, how did they move so fast? And we have remained almost on the same spot. My guest is the 40th Prime Minister of South Korea. Prime Minister Chung, welcome to Globewatch.
Thank you for your invitation.
After World War II, there were principally three economic miracles in the world: the Japanese economic miracle, the West German economic miracle, and the South Korean economic miracle. Tell me the early part of the South Korean economy. How did it start?
First of all, why don't I say this way? The German economy or the Japanese economy was rather strong even before the Second World War. So I wouldn't say it's a German miracle or Japanese miracle, but to the Korean side, we have made a miracle, and at the early stage or at the starting stage in the 1950s or so, the per capita GDP of Korea was less than $100, 100 US dollars. But now it's 28,000 US dollars. So there is a big difference between the starting point and the present point in the Korean economy.
What were the main key factors that led to this acceleration of economic growth in the 1950s, 60s, and 80s in South Korea?
Two factors responsible for the miraculous economic development of Korea. The first one is education. Now the Koreans are very interested in educating their children. So why don't I just introduce an anecdote in Korea about education. As I said, needless to say, a focus on education and investment in human capital was critical to the Korean economic development. With no significant natural resources or accumulated capital, Korea had to rely on a highly educated workforce to drive economic growth. Passion for education has a long heritage in Korea. Why don't I introduce a famous anecdote which might help you to understand the Korean people's attitude toward education. It involves the 16th century scholar Seok Han, who is recognized one of the foremost calligraphers in the Korean history. I will refer to him as Han. Han's mother, despite her desire to keep her son by her side, sent him to a Buddhist temple in the mountain so that he could focus on studies away from distractions.
Okay, Mr. Prime Minister, you just mentioned education and you said there were two key factors which accelerated this economic growth. Which is the other factor?
In addition to education and fighting spirit, hungry spirit, or can-do spirit of the Korean people, I would like to add export-led growth strategy.
Okay.
Now, Korea didn't have a large market due to low income. If people do not have a high level of income, then you cannot buy much, which means that you don't have a large enough market. So we made resort to foreign markets. That is why we tried to emphasize the export-led growth strategy in the first stage of economic development.
You just spoke about South Korean exports in order to sustain the economic momentum. What are the key sectors that hold, that bind, that keep the South Korean economy afloat?
Yeah, South Korea's largest industries are electronics, automobiles, telecommunications, shipbuilding, chemicals, and steel. For example, Samsung, which is well known for its Galaxy smartphones, is a Korean corporation. In addition, Hyundai Motors also has its roots in Korea. In the beginning, Korea was a very much agricultural country, but people possessed the will to modernize and passion for it. With the help of the government, manufacturing industries grew very fast. In the recent years, however, telecommunications and information technology sectors play an important role in the Korean economy. Lastly, I'm not sure whether this has direct relevance to the Korean economy, but at least indirect relevance to the Korean economy. K-pop is also an important part of the Korean economy, I would say. You probably know Psy with the song Gangnam Style. K-pop
Cultural diplomacy. You are talking there about the song of Pi, who sang the song. You are talking about cultural diplomacy.
What I mean to say is that although it's not directly related to the economy, it has helped a lot to the development of Korean economy in recent years.
Mr. Prime Minister, in the 40s, in the 50s, much of the South Korean society was an agrarian society, was an agricultural-based economy. Just tell me, how much did you people invest to transform the economy into an industrial one? What were the mechanisms of transformation that other countries can follow?
Yeah, we realized that the agrarian economy wouldn't grow to a large extent. So we tried to industrialize our country by developing the manufacturing industry. What we did was to make use of unlimited supply of labor in the agricultural sector. People tried to make move from the countryside or the agricultural side to the manufacturing side. For that purpose, you build some infrastructure in the urban area, build apartments, and you just so that people in the countryside easily move to the urban side. But at the same time, in order to help the manufacturing industry, the government was trying to maintain low wage rate for the manufacturing people. Of course, there was resistance from the laborers towards the low wage policy, but the government was successful in suppressing the over demand for high wages. Of course, in that process, the Korean people tried to...
South Korea has greatly liberalized its economy. Over 80% of the South Korean economy is in the hands of the private sector. You know, there is this famous Marshall Plan, which led to the reconstruction of European economies after World War II, a kind of $17 billion package named after the former American Secretary of State. Did you receive any help from the Americans, who are, of course, one of your biggest partners, to accelerate your growth?
In the early stages of economic development, I mean, in the early 1960s, for the first 2, 3, or 4 years, we tried to build our economy with the domestic capital. But unfortunately, we didn't have enough accumulated capital. Therefore, in 1965 or so, we tried to liberalize the economy in many ways, one of which was to import or introduce foreign capital, the first of which came from America, then Japan, and then from West Germany, and so on.
Now, I want you to tell me the products of the South Korean economy that make your country to be known worldwide, because most people talk of South Korea across borderlines. What are those products of the South Korean economy that are known in markets across the world? I know you will tell me of Samsung, because myself, I have a Samsung phone.
I have to say, we have good marketing people, so they just brought the products individually to the American market, the Japanese market, and the European market, and they tried to. They made a lot of efforts to market those products in those areas.
You are a success story. What lessons can other developing countries learn from the Korean experience to become a developed country like you? What can you tell them?
I told you that three contributing factors to the Korean economic development were investment in education, can-do spirit, and export-led growth strategy. From that, you can derive some lessons. You have to do your best to modernize your education. Especially, you have to make your education system creative mind.
South Korea is one of those economies that succeeded to withstand the storm of the collapse of Freddie Mae, Fannie Mae, the Lehman Brothers in the United States. What were the reforms that you introduced as Prime Minister that kept your country's economy resisting?
After the global financial crisis, we were very much worried about the future of the Korean economy. But one of the factors that suited us was that Korea, especially the financial sector of Korea, was not that much exposed to the global world, by which I mean the Korean financial system is rather independent of foreign financial institutions. Therefore, we were not that much damaged by the global financial crisis. But of course, we tried our best to make more exports to the industrialized world, but which is not that easy. The result of which is that now we are suffering from both the low growth rate and some kind of polarization of income and wealth.
I watched you talking at the Economic Forum in Yaounde, Cameroon, and you spoke of shared growth for sustainable development. What did you mean by that? Can you expatiate on that?
Yeah, in the past, our thinking was the following. If you make your economy grow, you have to sacrifice distribution. And at the same time, if you emphasize distribution, you have to do it at the risk of growth. But what I mean to say is that there was an or relationship, either growth or distribution. But I would say it's possible to have growth and distribution at the same time. You can maintain high level of equality. Shared growth is a philosophy that promotes economically growing together. Various scholars in different fields may refer to it with a slightly different name. If you go to America, for example, Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders use this term inclusive economy which shares similar ideas with shared growth. Shared growth aims to promote fairer distribution without curbing vigorous economic growth. I will explain the concept with a hypothetical scenario.
Yeah.
Let's say that Korea's economic output or GDP in 2015 is 100, and that 50% of the output went to the major conglomerates, while the other 50% went to SMEs or small and medium enterprises. Now let's imagine that Korean economy grew by 20% in 2016, bringing Korea's GDP up to 120 from 100. But this time, let's make distribution fairer. Conglomerates take away 45%, while SMEs get 55%. Both parties benefit from the growth because the wealth of the conglomerates went up from 50 to 54, while the wealth of the SMEs went up from 50 to 66.
Okay.
One moment.
Okay.
In other words, the real problem of the Korean economy is that while the SMEs contribute more than 50% of the work, they get much less than what they deserve. When you make the distribution process fairer and pay the SMEs for what they really deserve, we can achieve growth and distribution at the same time. In short, shared growth is about securing the justice in the process of distributing growth.
Mr. Prime Minister, you just spoke about small and medium-sized enterprises. If African countries, Cameroon in particular, want to do business with South Korea, what are the major areas you will advise them as a former Prime Minister for them to trade, which will be lucrative on both sides of the coin?
I would say we export to Cameroon some manufactured products, and you export to Korea some agricultural products and some other natural resources. I understand that you have a lot of natural resources in Cameroon, while Korea doesn't have enough resources. So there will be opportunity or room for the two countries to trade.
You just spoke a while ago that one of the key factors of transforming economies is education, that there should be investment in education. Which area of education in particular should there be much investment? In the industrial, technical, or just the ordinary level of education that you and I know? Yeah. Which are the key areas of the educational system that will generate problem-solving products more?
It's not easy to say because I'm not familiar with the educational system in Cameroon.
But I mean from the South Korean perspective.
For the last 50 years, we have invested a lot in education, but it was to accumulated human capital, which is very good in memorizing things. But from now on, we have to pay more attention to the human capital, which is creative. When you are followers in the world market, it's enough to learn what other people do, and you follow them. But if you become some leaders of the world economy, you need creativity. So we need some change in the education system in Korea, and I guess that can be applied to Cameroon and other countries.
Okay. Before we separate very soon, what has been the place of history in the development of your country? How much have you used your tradition, your customs, to be an economic giant? What has been the role of the Korean past in where you are today?
As I said, the passion for education in Korea is very keen. So you have to try follow what others do, but at the same time you have to keep your own. You have to keep your tradition, and at the same time you can learn from others. If you just do one side only, for instance, if you pay attention only to the tradition, you cannot modernize your country. But if you just follow what the Americans do or what the Europeans do, then I think there will be some chaos or imbalance in your economy and in your society.
Okay, look at your neighbors. China is a giant. Japan is a giant. Singapore, especially during the days of Lee Kuan Yew, who transformed the country. Has your environment in any form influenced your development model? Your neighbors, have they in anyhow influenced the way the South Korean economy is coined?
Sure, it's good to have giant neighbors like Japan, China, and a little giant Singapore. I mean, we have tried to follow them, which is a very good factor to speed up the Korean economy. But at the same time, sometimes since you are surrounded by all those giants, what I mean to say is that if you have big neighbors, it's good for you to think about modernizing your country.
What is the percentage South Korea occupies in the global economy?
I would say 2%. I mean, the South Korean GDP is only 2%, I would say, of the global product.
And you intend to take it further?
Sure, 3% would be better than 2%, but it's not an easy job.
That is not an easy job, and that will depend on the structure of the South Korean economy. What is the structure finally? What is the structure of the South Korean economy so that other nations can follow that model? How is it structured?
I'm not sure whether the Korean model is the best one or the best practice in the global sense, but the Korean economy has been successful in transforming itself from the agricultural one to the manufacturing one, and now to the service sector. I mean, it's quite natural for any country to transform itself from agriculture, manufacturing, and service. So that's what Korea has followed in the last 50 or 60 years.
Okay. The former Prime Minister of South Korea, Chung, thank you very much indeed for being guest on Globewatch.
Thank you for your invitation again.
You are welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you.
I just heard
But
you say,
before I finish,
I just heard you
no,
talk
don't
about
interfere.
adjustment in the currency. Do you propose, for example, so many economists have called on Buhari to do that, to devalue the naira?
It is not up to me to decide whether.
You said you are speaking from an expert point of
But
view.
yes,
So
yes,
from an
yes,
expert
yes.
point of view, will you advise the Nigerian government, if you were hired, will you advise them to devalue the naira to balance the books?
I'm putting to you that the adjustments needed in the macroeconomic area, on the fiscal side, on the balance of payment side, are necessary in all those countries who are facing this problem. And that may include adjustments of the currency. You know, currencies go up and down everywhere, all the time. So there's nothing about a particular fixed parity at any point in time. Now, how the adjustment of the currency is done is country specific. But whether the naira should be devalued, you'll have to ask the Nigerians. But if I was sitting in the central bank of Nigeria today, I would definitely advocate for a policy of adjustment of the currency.
Of the currency. What kind of adjustment are you talking about? Devaluation? Why are you afraid to use the word outrightly?
You know, the word is important, but the process is even more important. Some people have one time called devaluation export subsidy and import surcharges. So for me, the word is not important. What is important is adjustment to ensure that the balance of payment responds to the global shocks due to the low oil prices. Now, I'm not afraid of the word devaluation. As finance minister of my country, we're devaluing all the time. Many countries in the world have the currencies go up and down. That is the nature of the things. But if you don't do that, here's what will happen. The currency will find its proper value in the black market. The goods market will be functioning at the proper market price. So if you refuse to adjust the currency, you end up with two situations: the official market and unofficial market. And you end up with distortions which can be very, very damaging in the long term.